we did find out Connor Williams is going to be out for the season. Worst case scenario yesterday when he went down with that knee injury, was on the sideline in a brace, was that he'd be out for the rest of the season. And that appears to have come to fruition. Mike McDaniel confirming it a few minutes ago.
It felt like a fever dream, the first quarter of that game, watching Xavier Howard go down, Raheem Mostert go down, Connor Williams go down, Tyreek Hill go down, in what felt like consecutive plays in the first quarter. And I think we probably should have known when that started happening. Thankfully, the rest of them came back besides Connor Williams, unfortunately. We kind of seemed like we should have known what we were in for.
Yeah. The first 8 minutes of the broadcast were just brutal.
Carnage.
It was just brutal. And Tyreek, by the way, is day-to-day with that ankle injury. But he said that after the game last night that he's been dealing with ankle troubles all season and that this is probably going to be something that will bother him the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, we saw what this offense looks like without him for an extended period of time. And I've been someone who comes on here and says, well, there really isn't that much of a drop-off when Tyreek's not on the field. Tua Tagovailoa is still one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the league, even when Tyreek isn't out there. But that's like a play or two here and there over the course of games, and you add all that up, and, oh, look, the numbers are still great. But you see what it looks like when he's not there for an extended period of time over the course of one game, not just a play here and there. And for just his presence, his mere presence alone makes a difference. And, I'm always curious because when the Dolphins don't perform well offensively, it's because they're not getting good offensive line play. Last night, they didn't get good offensive line play, and Tyreek was out. And I don't think it's any coincidence that their three worst graded offensive line performances were the three games that Connor Williams didn't finish, and they were all losses. And I think you can make the argument that he is one of the more important players on this team. And it's so funny to hear myself say that because I remember back in the day when they drafted Mike Pouncey in the first round, I'm thinking, oh, a center in the first round? Like, what are we doing? It's a center. Connor Williams is one of the more important players on this team, and there is a drop-off. You give credit to Liam Eichenberg for playing well at guard the last handful of weeks, but he's not good when he's playing center. Just flatly, it's not. We saw the botched quarterback exchange, the snaps. Again, I don't know if anybody else is able to see it, but I brought it up before. It throws off the timing and the rhythm of this offense. There's a speed factor there on just the snap alone when they're in the shotgun. I know that's getting in kind of the minutia of it, but those things matter for an offense that's predicated on timing and precision. And it doesn't go well when Liam is the center. And unfortunately, when we talk about this team, I'm always the guy that comes on here as the eternal optimist. And I can always find something positive to take from a Dolphins loss. And I've been the apologist when I come on at Twin Peaks after losses. I'm always the apologist. Last night, there was nothing. I mean, Alec Ingold played well. That's the takeaway from last night. I mean, you can point to multiple catastrophic mistakes in all three phases of the game and on the coaching staff last night. Across the board, it was terrible.
Appel, because, if you want to rank, blame, and there was a ton of blame to go around yesterday. You want to rank blame in order. It sounds to me like you're putting the offensive line injury to Connor Williams and in general offensive line play as number one. And that to me doesn't make any sense because with all that being said, you had a 14-point lead with 2 minutes and 50 seconds left in the game. And as bad as the offensive line was and continued to be for that game due to injury, right? Mike McDaniel should have plays, knowing his offensive line is in distress, should have plays for those situations. A closeout drive, you need 1 first down. You keep Tyreek Hill on the bench for 2 plays, 2 of the most important plays, the most important drive of the game. You keep him on the bench after you had him on the field to return a kickoff? Doesn't make any sense to me. Even if he's not going to be able to catch the pass, even if he's hurt, just have him as a decoy, the most dangerous player in the league. Have him as a decoy out there, and it was a conservative-ass drive at the worst time for the least conservative coach in the NFL to be. And then 3rd and short, you have a full 2 minutes to come up with a play on 4th down and on 3rd down, and you don't convert. I mean, offensive line issues were huge last night, Appel. I don't even think it scratches the surface at what went wrong. I think coaching has to be at the top of the pecking order.
Let me be clear. I'm not saying that the offensive line is the number one reason they lost. They were missing 4 of their 5 starters after the first quarter on the offensive line. So my point was more that I'm not in the business here of ranking, well, who's the most to blame or who's the least to blame.
I am.
My point. Okay,
I am.
well,
yeah.
Great.
I am.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you either, because Mike McDaniel probably had his worst game as Dolphins head coach in his 2 years, and I don't think it's particularly close. I'm just saying this was across the board, aside from Alec Ingold, across the board, a shambolic performance. And I'll tell you what, I'll tell you this. The way that game ended is what they deserved. Not necessarily how they got there, because they were lucky, and then some, to be up by 2 touchdowns with 4 minutes to go. They were gifted the punt return fumble, and they were gifted the fumble on the bad pitch from Will Levis to Derrick Henry. That was a 13-13 game. They were down 13-10. They were down at halftime. They did not deserve to lose last night's game, or to win last night's game. The frustrating thing, of course, is that they were up 14 with 4 minutes to go. Nobody loses that game. 767-0 when leading by 14 or more with 3 minutes left. 767-0. Now 767-1. Even if the Titans go down, they get 1 touchdown on one of those final 2 drives. Okay, whatever. It was too easy. It looked like what the Dolphins offense looks like. Big chunk plays, quick scores. It was like a fever dream. Again, that final sequence. But it was just a roundabout way, unfortunately, and demoralizingly. It was a roundabout way to get to the result that, honestly, they deserved from the get-go, from kickoff. And it's the same thing that we've been talking about, even when they win sometimes, when it's not a crisp performance. It's the self-inflicted crap with this team every single week, aside from Washington. They were really good against Washington. But it's self-inflicted stuff, starting on the very first drive with the fumbled snap. And then Tua compounds the error by trying to pick it up and throw it again, fall on it, and live to see another down.
Okay, but I understand. Like I saw yesterday, everybody was just like torching the defense. Those last 2 drives, it was abysmal. There's no defending that, right? Like the way that Will Levis, of all people, just chopped you up in the open field. There's no defending that. But the reason you were up 14 points and had a chance at winning that game, should have won the game, is because of your defense. Like that's what really upset me about the final 2 drives. Was that the reason the Dolphins should have won that game was because of the defense. You had 10 points at halftime, not because of your offense. The offense never found its rhythm in that game, Appel, and it doesn't make any sense. That's why I'm so frustrated with McDaniel, because, look, I had posted this yesterday on Twitter. He's responsible for the greatest Dolphin season that we've had, that we've seen in our lifetimes, Appel. I'm speaking for us because we're the same age. Literally, this is the most exciting Dolphin season of my lifetime that I can remember. But he always talks about December football being the most important month of the season. Goes back to last year, going into that San Francisco and LA game, he talked about December football, building character, and being the most important stretch of the season. And this is where champions are built. And he's been trash in December. They went 0-4 last year in December, and he's got 1 win in this month thus far versus Washington. Right, but I'm saying body of work over his career. 0-4 last year and 1 win now over the Commanders. And it's like boneheaded decisions, not running the ball when clearly you should have been running the ball without Tyreek Hill. And then when Tyreek does come back into the game, you're throwing fade routes to a guy that's 5'9" when your offense and the passing game hadn't been clicking. So it's just like a lot of boneheaded decisions going back to last year in the most important month that, I still think McDaniel, as much as we love him and as much as he's proven that he's a really, really, really good NFL head coach, he still has a lot to learn in these critical moments of games, because the Dolphins, no matter how bad they played yesterday, they should have won that game. They should have.
Of course.
Absolutely should have won that game.
And I think all that criticism is fair, and I think Mike McDaniel would say that criticism is fair. The results are the results. I think last year you could put a little asterisk on the 4 games in December where Tua only played the 1 against Green Bay, right? And that one we learned he ended up playing with a concussion in that game. So I think that you can kind of put an asterisk on last year. That it's so disappointing because of how it happened. big picture, though, like, we can be upset, no doubt, and it's warranted for last night's game. But they're 9-4, the 2 seed in the AFC. They still have a clear chance at the 1 seed. Granted, it's a lot more difficult now than it was had they won last night. They're still in the driver's seat for the division. Everything that they want is still in front of them. Now, the biggest concern, now that we'll talk with Adam Beasley in the next hour about this of Pro Football Network, but the biggest concern is health. You could talk about performance on the field, but if they are this banged up, guys, Jalen Phillips on Black Friday, Connor Williams last night. We don't know if Javon Holland, our good friend, is going to play this Sunday. We don't know if Deshaun Elliott will play this Sunday. We don't know if Robert Hunt or Teron Armstead or any of these guys are going to be healthy. And that's the name of the game when you get late into these seasons, late into the playoffs. It's really just the luck of who's healthiest. And I'm not sure that this offensive line and the injuries in general, I'm not sure that they can overcome that. Maybe they can win a game or two in the playoffs. But as far as getting to the Super Bowl and winning a Super Bowl, for me, the math has changed on that. And that's unfortunate because it's just luck of injuries. And people could say, oh, well, they signed a lot of guys and they have a lot of guys who are injury prone. Like, it doesn't matter how injury prone you are. Connor Williams got rolled up on a hit from, like, that's a very unfortunate, very common injury for an offensive lineman. Unfortunate. Teron Armstead, we know he's been hurt a lot. Robert Hunt doesn't deal with a lot of injuries. This is a first for him. Javon Holland, he's a warrior. He's out there every week. Like, I'm not buying into that narrative either. Generally speaking, I think this team will be fine because I think ultimately talent will win out to get to the end of the regular season. And thankfully, they have the Cowboys at home. Thankfully, they have the Bills at home. Obviously, Baltimore on the road will be tough. But I look at the AFC. Do you see a team that is flawless atop the AFC? Because I don't. There is no San Francisco of the AFC. There isn't. So I don't think that this is doom and gloom. The season is over. It might feel like it because of how catastrophic that loss felt, and it should feel that bad. But I don't think that the world is ending here. Now, screw around with the Jets on Sunday. There's a different conversation at Twin Peaks on Monday for us.
That's how I feel, right? Where, like, you think last night was bad, watch the Dolphins lose at home to the Jets, and it'll be 30 times worse. No matter how it happens, it'll be 30 times worse.
We were talking in the last segment about last night's Dolphins game, of course. And what else are we going to talk about the day after one of the more catastrophic losses I think I've ever seen in my life by a Dolphins team? And there have been plenty. And I know this brings up a lot of nightmares and a lot of suppressed negativity from Dolphins fans because once you finally felt that this team was different, that this team wasn't like all the other ones, they're still the Dolphins at the end of the day. And they that was something last night. And one of the things we didn't talk about in the first segment, of my first segment, I should say, was Tua and his role in last night. And I want to preface this by saying I don't think that Tua was the main reason they lost. Again, I think that there's plenty of blame to go around yesterday. And I'm not going to rank all of them from first to fifth. I know that's Solana's deal. Hopefully he can put together a top 5 before the end of the show. We didn't touch on other areas either. Like, they had a blocked field goal. They had an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on the long snapper that led to a short kick and giving the Titans the ball around midfield. Then after they went 3 and out on the 2-minute possession after the first Titans touchdown in the fourth quarter, a line drive punt from Jake Bailey that led to a good return and good field position for the Titans. You had Bradley Chubb in the first half, whiff on a sack, and then instead of taking 3 more steps and throwing his helmet on the sideline, he throws it in the field of play, cost the Dolphins an extra 4 points. There was so much to go around. Yeah.
Appel, was that not the dumbest thing you've ever seen in your really? Like, you're an NFL broadcaster for I don't know how many years. Is that not the dumbest thing you've ever seen from an NFL player, at least in a very long time? Because if he's 3 yards further from where he threw his damn helmet, it's not a penalty because he's on the sideline. What the hell? The second I saw him do it, I'm like, what are you doing? They're going to flag. Yeah. They're going to throw the flag. It was the easiest flag they could have thrown.
It seemed like they got rattled pretty early last night. And I think it started with that with the injury to Connor Williams and the fumble. I mean, that entire first half of the first quarter where guys were dropping with injury. And it just seemed like they couldn't get in that right headspace, despite the fact that they were up by 14 with 3.5 minutes to go. Here's the bottom line about Tua. He needs to be better. He's averaging about a fumble a game. He didn't have any interceptions last night, so in that regard, he took care of the football. But the fumbles are becoming a problem for him. And he has had a fantastic season. And I think that he is worth the extension the Dolphins will eventually give him. However, just flat out, like, he has to be better than he was last night. I know Tyreek not being who Tyreek normally is when he was on the field and when he wasn't on the field for the majority of that game. But they've still got talent at receiver, man. Like, Waddle's a good player. Like, Braxton's a good slot receiver. They've still got Mostert and Achane. Like, there are guys on this offense that they should still be able to have success, especially. And I think one of the more disconcerting things about the fact that they couldn't protect Tua last night was the fact that Jeffrey Simmons was not playing for the Titans. They had a ton of injuries on defense too, and the Dolphins just couldn't take advantage of it. And I know a lot of the blame will go for Tua because that's just the nature of the quarterback position. But they were up 27-13 at the end of the game there, man. Like, get one stop. Even if you give up one of those garbage time touchdowns, get one more stop. And I'll ask Beasley about this when he joins us at 5:20. I was a little surprised that Vic Fangio didn't dial up some pressure there at the end of the game. They kept rushing for, and I would imagine that it was because they had both backup safeties in, and you don't want to leave the secondary even more vulnerable than they already are, missing who they were missing. But it was clear that when they got into Will Levis's face, he was obviously not the same guy, and he was able to stand back there and pick him apart. And then watching DeAndre Hopkins run across the field with nobody within 10 yards of it, it's just frustrating because they're so much better than this than they were and they showed last night at the end. They really are. And while Tua deserves some of the blame, I think that we could put to rest any MVP talks that were associated with Tua Tagovailoa. Unfortunately, he's still having a great year.
And you know, it sucks that the one game that he could have had the opportunity to show that he's not having this type of season because of Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill goes out, it's on national TV, right? Like, it doesn't play into his favor that the one opportunity he had to show everybody, hey, look, it's not just Tyreek. I could do this without Tyreek because he's injured today. Everybody in the world is watching the game, unless you were watching Tommy Cutlets tear up the Green Bay Packers last night. But, Appel, every score the Dolphins had yesterday came off of either a defensive touchdown in the first quarter or a Titans mistake. The Dolphins didn't drive the ball down the field to score a touchdown once.
Well, the problem is they did drive down the field and got into the red zone
Just
3 other times
and
didn't score. And that goes back to Mike McDaniel because they were running the ball at will against this Titans defense. And they got inside the 10, they got inside the 5, and we were throwing fades on the goal line to Cedric Wilson on 3rd and goal. I think Cedric Wilson's a nice player. What are we doing?
It's mind-numbing. It's mind-numbing.
And they get there later in the game in the same spot, and they're running on back-to-back possessions. And hey, look, they score a couple of touchdowns. To what we think at the time ices the game. This was as across the board of a poor performance, except for Al Kingold, as you'll see.
But when it goes to Tua, Appel, like, correct me if I'm wrong here. Offensive line is banged up. I get it, man. Your best receiver's out. You're put in a tough situation. It's Monday Night Football. Like, all those things working against you, fine. 3rd and 3. The play call is to throw an out to Devon Achane behind the line of scrimmage. Fine. That's McDaniel's play call, right? But I don't know, man. Pick up that damn first down. You know, as simple as that analysis is, and I know I sound like a gas bag right now, get the first down. Like, give yourself an opportunity to get the first down. And some of those boneheaded decisions or mistakes that killed the Dolphins last year were pre-snap penalties, delay of games. Like,
happened again last night.
We hadn't seen a lot of that this year, right? All that, for the most part, there was a couple of instances against the Bills. Like we hadn't really seen it. It wasn't an issue. I wouldn't call it an over.
No, they had corrected it this
last
season.
night. You burned 2 timeouts before the 8-minute mark in the fourth quarter of a tight game that you were down in, because you have to avoid a delay of game, getting out of the huddle quickly 2 times. Like it, bro. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
They lost one of the timeouts, the first one, because he challenged the long pass to Spears on the would-be fumble. And that wasn't a good challenge. I get taking the chance. But, I mean, what's more important there? Like, there's still plenty of time left in the game. You're going to need those timeouts.
Of course. Appel, I think there's obviously the people who today are overreacting and saying, see, Tua showed you he's a bum. He's a game manager. Like, that's garbage. It's ridiculous. But there's also, people that don't want to put any of the blame on Tua. Oh, the offensive line was terrible. Tyreek's out. I think there's a happy medium where he's had a phenomenal season.
All those things are true.
Correct. He's a phenomenal season. He's obviously elevated his game. He learned how to fall, even though he stopped doing jiu-jitsu, which I'm very upset about.
He's a master now.
Debatable. All those things are true, but also, hey, pick up a first down when you needed it yesterday. You needed to win that game. You had to avoid that epic collapse yesterday. And while the offensive line is banged up and Liam Eichenberg is in front of you snapping the ball and he's snapping it into his gooch, while all those things are true, you needed 3 downs to keep your team alive yesterday, and you had 2 opportunities to do it, and you were unable to do it. Make a play, bro. Make a play.
I think the frustrating thing about the fourth down was that, like, he didn't even take a chance to give one of his guys a shot. It took the sack. Like, I get trying to extend the play, and I get wanting to see a guy, and see a window. But at that point, you've got nothing after that. You've got to at least take the chance and give your guys a shot to make a play. And I think even before that, the sense of urgency on that 2-minute drive was not there. And then you compound the fact that on that third down Achane play, one official says clock stopped. So they're kind of slowly getting up and gingerly going back to the line. And then another guy sprints in from behind the play and says, no, we're going to wind the clock. And that's another 20 seconds that went away. And everything that went wrong last night could go wrong. But I do want to say this. And I kind of alluded to it in the last segment. Every team that's contending in the AFC has its flaws. And all of those teams have the one head-scratching loss this season. This is the Dolphins' first head-scratching loss. I think that if they lose the game 16-13 and then the Titans drive down the field and they kick a game-winning field goal at the end and they just flat out lose like you lose a game, okay, whatever. I think it's because not only did they lose, but the way in which they lost to that team with Will Levis, who may be good. I call this first game his first start against the Falcons, and he was phenomenal against a solid Falcons defense. But last night, they made him look like he was a bona fide top 10 guy in the fourth quarter.
Crazy.
And for a defense that had played so well over the last 6-7 weeks, they crumbled at the end. And I think it's the manner in which they lost, which is the most frustrating. Because, look, I think last night is a perfect example of why you never knock a team for beating the teams that they're supposed to beat, even if it's ugly. I mean, the Raider game, ugly, but they won. The Patriots game, ugly, but they won. You don't knock a team for banking the wins. That's why all those wins were important coming into this. I tell you, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it right now. I tell you before the season, 9-4, going into week 15, 2 seed in the AFC, first place in the AFC East, a clear shot still to be the number 1 seed. You're like, all right, great.
For sure.
But it's the recency of last night and how it happened. I still think this team will be fine. I still think they're going to make the playoffs. Please beat the Jets. I still think they're going to make the playoffs, but it's the manner in which last night's loss took place, not the fact that they lost the game, in my opinion.
Appel, if I told you the Dolphins are going to be on Monday Night Football, and they're going to have a 14-point lead with 2 minutes and 50 seconds left and be the first team since 1976 to blow it 8 months ago, you'd also say, yes, same old Dolphins. Same old Dolphins.
For sure.
So I don't blame people for having PTSD and going, uh-oh, here we go.
Oh, no doubt.
Here comes a December collapse. I don't blame people. I'm with you, though. I think this team is different. And hell yes, 100 out of 100 times, I'm taking 9-4 going into the final 4 games of the season with a chance to win the AFC. So yes, 100%. But expectations shift. That's just the reality. And when you play as well as you have, I think winning ugly games against bad teams can be just as important as blowing teams out 70-20 or beating good teams just like handedly, because at some point this season, the Dolphins, if they make it to the playoffs, which we expect them to, they're going to be in an ugly situation and they're going to have to find ways to win ugly. That's just the reality of the NFL. So even if it's against a Titans team that's kind of ass, it doesn't matter. You have to figure out ways to win those games. And last night was scary, man, because
they found ways to lose it, no doubt.
Right. The narrative that they can't beat good teams hasn't really bothered me because I don't buy into that. Like, I think they're going to get the opportunity now with 2 of those 3 at the end of the season at home.
Yeah.
But not being able to win ugly, they did it against the Raiders. They kind of got lucky against the Raiders, though, that Jalen Ramsey was just a monster. But
you don't apologize for those wins.
Of course not. Of course not. Yeah, nobody should. But to me, it was more important to win that game last night in a way than it was to, beat the Ravens on the road, just because you have to win games like that in the playoffs at some point.
I had an interesting thought last night after the game, and I was thinking about how many times this season the Dolphins have had to be in that situation with the ball driving down late, and that was only the second time. And both times, they failed. Yeah. The Kansas City game, the fumble. I mean, they put together a good start to that drive. They got to where they needed to go, and it looked like they'd have a shot, and they shot themselves in the foot. That's the shot. Last night, decent start of the drive. They got a first down. They're set up with 3rd and 3. Got 2 plays to get 3 yards. This is a chunk play offense. They do it with their eyes closed against a banged-up Titans defense, and they couldn't do it. And I think that this can be a very good learning experience for this team, being in that situation, not coming out on top. And I want them to remember this feeling, because I remember this feeling, and I know all the fans remember this feeling. It does not feel good. And I imagine, in fact, I know for a fact that the players feel the same way. I mean, it's deep breaths, everyone. Deep breaths. It's 1 loss on the schedule, and if they win Sunday against the Jets, it'll soften the pain. But that's a big if.
It will.
Zach Wilson without the reins, that's still a good Jets defense. I mean, the banged up offensive line, Quinnen Williams coming in. I've seen the Geno Smith perfect passer rating game when the Dolphins needed to win late in the season at home. I've seen that one before.
Yeah. You can't lose to Zach Wilson, bro. You can't lose to Zach Wilson. Come on. There's no way.
They'll be fine. They'll win Sunday. I hope.
14 points, Appel. 14 points. 2 minutes and 50 seconds left.
And I was sitting there thinking, wow, 13.5 was the spread. They're going to need a little backdoor cover here.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were savvy and maybe you threw on -4.5 and -3.5 during the game, and okay, they give up the first garbage time touchdown, you're still good with the -4.5.
So we talk about Tua, and again, like, I hate doing this because it sounds like we're taking away from his season, but Tua MVP conversation doesn't seem
over.
It's Dunzo, right? You're with me? It's Dunzo.
Yeah, but that's not to say that. Again, he's not been great this year because they're not in this spot without him.
I'm just saying, last night, probably, even if the Dolphins end up winning the AFC, I just don't. I don't see him overcoming that last night. I just don't.
He looked like just a guy last night.
Yeah,
and I think that I don't buy into the criticism that people will say, well, everything has to be perfect around him. Everything has to be perfect for him to have success. It's the scheme. It's the talent around him. We've talked about that plenty of times on this show. That's every quarterback in the league. There's like 2 guys who can overcome what's going on around them. You take 4 of the 5 starters away from Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or any quarterback in this league, and they're going to look not the same as they do when they're all healthy, or even 2 of them are healthy. Like, that's the reality of it. And they weren't able to overcome it last night, unfortunately. It's the NFL. There are pros on the other side, too. Crap happens. Unfortunately, this was really crappy.
So with
ultimate crap.
With that being said, does that help Tyreek's chances at winning the MVP? Like, I think last night the fact that he didn't play is going to hurt him getting to 2,000 yards, which is what I thought would be the only way he could win it. But if we're talking about most valuable player, clearly Tyreek out last night, you saw his value. Like, I wonder really, if that helps him in an MVP conversation.
But I think Javon in the first hour of the show brought up a good point. We've also seen what the Dolphins offense looks like without Tua Tagovailoa last year.
Yeah.
So we can, and Tyreek was playing. So we can say that Tyreek's the most important player, but the offense needs both of them, okay? They need both of them to have success. And maybe when it's, you take one of them out, they don't look the same. And that's just the reality of both. And yes, when Tua's in there, they need Tyreek. When Tyreek's in there and Tua's not, they need Tua. I mean, it's just that simple. And we want to make this whole big thing about who's more important and who's this, who's that. Like, they put together this team to have both those guys on the field. Regardless of what you think, that's when they're at their best. So to say one guy's more important than the other, okay, maybe Tyreek's more important and maybe he has the better case at MVP now. But they need both of them to be out there. Point blank, period.